Welcome to our webinar, CMMC Clarified. This is insights from hundreds of assessments. We're going to be talking about what has changed. It's been almost a year now since assessments started. I know that's kind of insane to say out loud. It doesn't feel real, but technically we had assessments start last August, so it's almost a year now. So real quick, we'll go over the agenda. We'll do some quick introductions. We'll talk about the latest CMMC timeline because I know everybody is itching to hear about that, and key clarifications from the 12 months of assessments that we have. So for we finally are in a situation where we actually have some consistent data to share, and we're really excited to do that today. We'll also talk about compliance transparency and how to get to 110, and then we'll save some room for Q&A. I will say that we got over 70 questions that were submitted before this webinar. So that's a pretty crazy number of questions, and we love that. So we do have a lot of Q&A, and obviously we know that you guys are going to have questions as we go through the webinar. So we're going to try to leave as much time as we can at the end to get as many questions in as humanly possible. But with that, real quick, I would like to introduce myself and also our panelists. So I am Noelle Vestal. I am the Chief Compliance Officer here at PreVeil. We were the very first company to be recognized by the Department of Defense as FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent. There have since been several others, but we were the first. And if you're not familiar with what PreVeil is, we are an end-to-end encrypted email and file storage platform serving almost 2,000 members of the DIB. So we have a lot of experience when it comes to compliance, and also with helping especially small to medium-sized businesses in the compliance space, especially for CMMC and other compliance frameworks as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steven.
My name is Steve Pratt. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Sentar. We are a C3PAO. I lead our C3PAO, CMMC, and FedRAMP and ICS lines of business. I'm also lead CCA. Sentar was the 21st C3PAO, and we've just went past our 3-year mark just a couple of months ago.
Congratulations. It's a big deal. Obviously, last but not least, Tom, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, Steve, I remember going through that reauthorization DIBCAC assessment here ourselves. We did that, I think, late last year as well. But I'm Tom Tollerton. I'm a principal in Forvis Mazars. We're a top 10 public accounting firm globally, and also one of the early authorized C3PAOs. I'm a lead CCA and lead the CMMC and C3PAO practice for our firm.
We do want to talk a little bit about the CMMC timeline. For those of you who are unaware, if you see on the left-hand side in December of 2024, we have 32 CFR rule becoming effective. What that was the actual rule that sort of created CMMC as a legal requirement. Now, this is a little different. You see the CFR 48 down there. I'm going to get to that in a second. So CMMC was in effect. It was real in December. You see here, January, February timeframe is when we had C3PAOs, such as Sentar and Forvis, who were coming in to do those assessments on their own without the DoD influence. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then all the way on the other side, you've got basically where we are right now. The DoD has sent CFR 48 to OMB. So that means, what does that mean? Well, what that means is now we actually have sort of a bit more of a concrete timetable. And I say a bit more because there's still a little bit of gray area and flexibility the DoD has. But essentially, once it goes for that final review at the OMB with OIRA, which is where it is now, it's usually anywhere between 30 and up to 120 days. So I know that's kind of a really long runway, but I will say that there's really nobody who thinks it's going to go past probably 60 days, just so we're all clear. This is, as we all know, this has been very, very long in the making, and everybody is really ready to have this out there. And what I'm talking about, well, what is it that's actually going to be out? If you see below, CFR 48 is expected to become effective October, November of this year. CFR 48 is the companion legislation to CFR 32. So think of CFR 32 establishing the program. CFR 48 gives the implementation process for the government to put it into contracts. So if I'm a contracting officer, I have to have that legal understanding of what I need to require for that contract in order to have that regulation inside of it, and CFR 48 is that. So once that becomes effective, if you look at the very last little box on the right, CMMC requirements are expected to start entering DoD contracts as soon as October, November. So this is something to remember, that Once CFR 48 is live, that means that a contracting officer in the DoD absolutely can work with the agency and add this to a contract, an upcoming contract, an extension. I mean, just about anything you want. So it's just something to be aware of. If you've been thinking to yourself, maybe CMMC isn't going to come for me and this is fine and I don't have to worry about it, it is definitely that window is closing very, very quickly. So with that, we'll start talking about the different topics that we're going to discuss today in the webinar. And the first thing that I'm going to start with right now is I'm going to explain a little bit about what has changed in the past 12 months when it comes to assessments, just to level set where we are. So back in August of 2024, the DoD's assessment branch, which is called the DIBCAC, DIBCAC, the DIBCAC started doing what was called Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessments, or JSV assessments. They would work with companies like Sentar and Forvis as the C3PAO, and they would work together in order to get the OSC, or the organization seeking certification, get to their certification. The reason why this was very different is because the DoD was involved directly in this. The C3PAO was there to sort of run everything, be involved very heavily, but the DoD did have the final sort of say on things in the end. There was a lot of sort of confusion as to what, assessors were going to agree to and not agree to with some of the control interpretations and that sort of thing. It was still a little bit murkier than it is now. Now we fast forward to, January, February this year, when we have C3PAOs on their own doing assessments. So that means that there is no longer a DoD representative from the DIBCAC who is a part of these assessments. These are purely 100% these companies like Sentar and Forvis who are going out there and doing these C3PAO assessments. This is all commercial, no DoD oversight in the same way that it was before. So this has changed a lot of things, because now the C3PAO community can start coming together and sort of make decisions as a collective on how they're going to interpret different controls and how they're going to see different things, which is great. And as time goes on, we're going to get more and more of that understanding as we have more and more assessments and more understanding from all of the assessors and more agreement from all those assessors. So I wanted to level set that part. So remember, that means we've only had about 6 months of C3PAO only assessments, but we've also had 6 months of the ones with the DoD as well. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So I was just discussing how the DIBCAC, it was a little bit murky on some things. Some of those things have kind of been ironed out a little bit now. So I wanted to ask some specifics on what's been clarified in the past 12 months. And Steve, I'll start with you. What are those controls that can be POAMed? And for everybody out there, if you're not familiar with what a POAM is, that is a plan of action and milestone, meaning these are things that maybe during the assessment you haven't got it 100%, and you could conceivably get a POAM extension of 6 months to be able to correct that. But could you explain that a little bit more in depth for us, Steve?
Sure. And this is all established in the Title 32 rule that came out last October. But it gives the rules of what can go on in a POAM. So you're right, it's 180 days, a maximum of 180 days that the control can be on a POAM. There are some guidance as to which controls cannot be on a POAM. So it doesn't say which ones can, but it says which ones can't. It lists about 6 controls that it specifies cannot be on there, as well as anything that's higher than a 1-point control. So if you've been doing the scoring for a while, you know that each control is worth 1, 3, or 5 points. So if it's a 3 or a 5, it cannot be POAMed. You also have to get at least 80% of the way there. So you can't, every available control that can be POAMed, you can't POAM all of them. You have to at least get 180% there. One thing that some companies don't think about when they're going through a POAM is that 180 days includes the time that it takes to get your C3PAO back in there to reassess those controls to make sure that you're meeting them. Always, don't wait till day 179 to call your C3PAO and see if they're available.
That's actually an extremely good point, and I hope people remember that one. I will also ask too, so is it just any of those controls? So let's say that I have, I still got an 88 out of 110, which is an 80%. I've answered 88 of the controls. Let's say the rest of my controls are all 1-pointers and I don't have anything done for them. So I can just go ahead and be POAMed,
right,
for the rest of them? Is that how that works?
Essentially, yes. There's no, there was no, at one point there was talk that it was going to be, they couldn't all be from the same family and things like that. But it's pretty clear in the Title 32 what the rules are there.
And is this something that is up to the discretion of the C3PAO? Like, for example, if there is one of those 1-point controls, can the C3PAO make a decision that maybe that one, for whatever reason, can't be on a POAM?
The C3PAO that determination. The C3PAO can only make the determination as to whether they've passed that control or not. If they did not, it is one of those that can be put on a POAM. They have the right to do that.
That's good to know. And I know that that was not solidified previously. So that's a good example of how things have changed in the past 12 months. And we've got an actual solid understanding of that. Thank you. That was a wonderful overview, Steve. I appreciate it. One of the other things that got kind of settled, if you will, and I use that term loosely with CMMC, nothing ever seems to be 100% settled, but what was pretty much settled when the final rule went into effect, Tom, was VDI. Could you talk a little bit, first of all, like what is a VDI? And then why is this such a big deal that we settled this in the final rule?
Sure, absolutely. So VDI stands for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. And when we think about scoping for CMMC, organizations ideally would want to have as minimal scope as possible for their assessment, the minimal amount of their infrastructure, people, so forth, to make it both from a risk perspective, but also from a compliance burden perspective, make it as small as possible. So we hear a lot about enclaves being built out, designed to host the controlled unclassified information versus having the entire organization or an enterprise-wide sort of approach to an assessment. And essentially what VDI does is it creates within these enclaves little virtual desktops that organizations and users can log into remotely from outside of that enclave to access that controlled unclassified information. And there are a number of ways to build VDI architecture, but it's a great solution. And there were a lot of questions about whether or not that was going to be a valid scoping solution. And the 32 CFR rule explicitly defined that if implemented sufficiently, and that sort of is the C3PO sort of assessment, that falls under the category of out of scope assets, which effectively means the virtual desktops themselves that people log into, users log into to access the CUI are in scope, but all of the laptops, thin clients, anything on the outside of that environment do not have to adhere to all of the rigorous controls of the NIST 800-171 framework of CMMC.
So Tom, is that if there are people out there who are listening right now who are maybe they have a whole lot of endpoints. And when I say endpoints, like laptops and desktops and things that people are using to actually input and interact with CUI, is a VDI now a viable solution for them to get those, what we call the inputting device, out of scope?
Absolutely. Yep. It is now by rule in the rule. It's not any sort of supplementary document or anything. It is in the rule that is a valid scoping mechanism.
Yeah. And that's something, again, that was not solidified in any way before the final rule. There was
in the proposed rule, right?
Yeah, the proposed rule. Yeah, everybody was like, well, some people would say, VDI, no, it takes the inputting out of scope, and other people would say, no, it doesn't. And there was a lot of back and forth in the ecosystem about that. So it's been very good, I'm sure, especially from an assessment standpoint, for you guys to have something solid in writing that you can do that. And what does VDI do? Because you were talking about minimizing the scope, but what does it do to the assessment? Does the assessment become shorter or less involved because of this? Does it have any effect on the assessment?
It can shorten the assessment simply because there's less for an assessor to look at. We don't have to pull up as many dashboards necessarily or systems to look at during the assessment, have artifacts and so to speak. But also there's, for the contractor themselves, less likelihood that, say, we pull a sample, we take a look at a system and oops, it misses a control, because there are thousands of systems in scope in an enterprise assessment. If we can get that down, to a much more controlled environment, less likelihood of a potential miss, so to speak.
Absolutely. And yeah, cannot stress this enough. You'll hear it a million times in this webinar and every other webinar we do. Limit your scope, limit your scope, limit your scope.
Absolutely.
However you can do it, you're going to make things so much easier for yourself, not only for the assessment, but also you have to maintain this long term. Make it as easy to maintain as you can, and your compliance is going to be a lot simpler in the out years. Definitely. Thank you, Tom. That was perfect. And Steve, I'm going to send this one to you. This is a fun one. External service providers and managed service providers. This has been a conversation I know that's gone back and then forth and then back and then forth again. And so would love to get an actual explanation of, okay, does an MSP need to be certified for CMMC? Yes, no, when, how? If you could dive into that, that would be so great.
Steve, you got
Well-
30 seconds to answer the MSP
Yes.
issue.
The rule establishes an ESP, so external service provider. There are two types. There's an ESP that is a CSP and an ESP that is not a CSP. CSP is cloud service provider.
Too many letters.
Yes, the MSPs, managed service providers, fall under that ESP that is not a CSP. So a little bit of the word salad there gets confusing. Do they need to be certified? Short answer is no. Should they be certified? Short answer is sometimes. So it's going back to what you said, scoping. Scope down as much as you can. If your MSP is considered a CUI asset, so
When would it
if
be
you-
considered a CUI asset? That's a big one.
yes, so if your MSP handles your company's CUI, so if there's nothing to prevent that CUI from transversing your network into your MSP's network, then that brings the MSP's network or system into scope. There are ways to prevent that. So in some cases, you might have the MSP's employees, their technicians might have access to your system. You can make them an authorized user on your system, and that pretty much takes care of that part. If they have, if they're working on your system and they're using their company's laptops to connect, there's ways to make either scope those in your environment, or they can use a remote management tool that would prevent CUI from transmitting. For the most part, you want your MSP not to be handling CUI. If you do that correctly, your MSP will most likely be a security protection asset. And so they will be part of very likely be part of your assessment. But they won't have to, we're going to be looking at the shared responsibility matrix that shows what's the responsibility of you versus the MSP. And we're going to talk to your MSP to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing for the security of your system. At the point where they are a CUI asset, we have to either verify that they have their own level 2 certificate, which any may or may not, or we have to conduct a complete separate assessment of their system. So guess whose price goes up?
And who's paying for that? Just that second 110 assessment that they didn't account for?
Yes, the OSC is likely paying for that. Then now they could probably try to work something out with MSP to share that funds. I don't know, but essentially, you passing your assessment is determined on them passing their assessment at that point. And we are assessing two separate things. It's double the price, double the effort. And for that MSP, you get to go through that being fully assessed for every one of your clients. So if the you just went through an assessment, you passed, your OSC passed, you don't get a certificate. Your client gets a certificate. That that next client's going through theirs next week, you're getting assessed again. So if you're an MSP and if you fall in that situation where you have to be a CUI asset, it makes total sense for you to get your own CMMC certification.
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely agree. I mean, we've had a lot of different customers like, well, what's going on with the MSP and how do I use it and how do I not? I think you explained that beautifully. You want to scope them out if you don't want them a part of your assessment as much as possible. If you don't want them to be, needing a CMMC level 2 assessment or getting their own assessment or what have you, then you want to make sure to scope them out of that CUI asset category. Get them as far away from CUI as you possibly can. And a real quick question on this, just because we get this question all the time. So what about if I'm just using a managed service provider for like my SOC response? They're just, they're addressing some security things. They're doing some scanning, maybe vulnerability scanning or something. Is that information, those logs that they capture, is that make them a CUI asset?
No, those logs are considered security protection data. So it is part of, the MSP would be a security protection asset. The tools they use would be that. The data needs to be protected as CUI, but it's still not the level of scope that you would go through as if you were handling CUI.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a question we get all the time. So I appreciate it. And then, Tom, I'm going to send this one over to you. This is a great question too. What is the importance of the SSP? What are some of the issues you've seen with people with MSS or SSPs? Too many letters. With SSPs, what are some of the issues you've seen? What are some great things you've seen? And why is it so important that your SSP just be so fantastic when you do an assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually got a question in the box on that. I'm going to hit that
Great.
too on the SSP, but obviously the system security plan is frankly the crux document that your C3PAO is going to start with during their assessment to get an understanding of your environment. And so that is why it's so important to make sure it's complete, that it's accurate, and frankly that it's approved so that the management has signed off on it. We look to kind of have that done. Suggest clients kind of have that done annually. But the reason being is because the assessment phase is really, or the assessment is really a two-phase process. So there's a readiness review period where the C3PAO looks at that system security plan and any supporting policies, procedures, anything that sort of supports the statements in the SSP will be reviewed as well, along with your network diagram, data flow diagrams, and so forth. But that is what the assessors are going into the phase two, the actual assessment that includes validating everything in the system security plan. That's what they're going by. And so to get through that phase one gate, so to speak, you'll want to make sure that all 110 controls are met by your system security plan, or at least what you've implemented is designed to meet the 110 requirements. If they don't, then you won't get past that first readiness review period. You won't even get to the assessment. So that's kind of, part one, why it's really important. And then, you don't want to actually get into the assessment. Let's say everything appears good in your system security plan, but you get into the phase two and everything is not everything, but there are contradictions between your system security plan and what is in place. That can constitute failure of particular requirements as well. I don't know if we want to dig into it here, but there are certain limited control deficiencies that can be addressed in documentation. So if you actually are doing something, implementing a control that meets the requirements of NIST 800-171, but your documentation is not quite in line with that, you can fix that during the assessment week, but you can't change controls. You can't change the environment itself. So that's why you want to make sure those are all in alignment. And then just to the sort of the question in the chat about how current does the SSP need to be, it just really needs to be accurate. So I mean, if it was developed 2 years ago and your environment has not changed dramatically, that's fine. You'll just want to validate that and make sure you're reviewing it and approving it periodically, so that when you get into an assessment, it's still accurate.
And we also had another question that was in the Q&A that I thought was a really good one about SSPs. One of the questions was talking about how they have a 1,000-page SSP. They know somebody else with a 30-page. I get this question all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do too, but is there a page ideal? Is there not?
I'm sure Steve will want to weigh in here too, but I think 1,000 pages is probably overkill for 99% of assessments that we would do. 30 pages is probably too short.
Agreed.
So it does not need to be, you don't have to have every process and procedure outlined in the system security plan. You don't have to paste a bunch of screenshots in it. That's not the necessity. It's really just narrative on here's how we are meeting as an organization or an enclave the control requirement that is listed above. So I would say there's probably a happy medium there. We've seen them, 75 pages, and we've seen them 300-400 pages. But Stephen, I'm sort of curious your perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to be mad if you hand me 1,000 page.
I don't want to read it.
Because then you have to read it. Yeah.
Honestly, the way I try to direct people is, you can put everything in your SSP. You can utilize policies and procedures. Ideally, you utilize policies and procedures where you can, and your SSP should tell the story of your security. So your policies and procedures are how you do things, and then your SSP is kind of like the cliff notes. It tells the relative stuff that you need to do. It points to where to go to find more information and more details on that. But it's really the plan. It is planned. It's how are you meeting the controls? How are you doing the security for each of these? And so I agree. The 30 pages is probably short, because there's a lot that has to go in there. As far, there's 110 controls. You have to have information about your system, your diagrams, things like that in there. So 30 pages is, probably a little short, but I wouldn't expect it to be, just, a full novel of information.
And to your point, you had mentioned, so I just want to sort of double click on this, and for everybody who's out there in the world still looking, okay, how long should my SSP be? What should be in it? That was a great way. Both of you explained that so well, what really should be in there. But I know that and this is not so much now, but I know in previous times in CMMC, people are like, no, you do have to list every single thing in your SSP. You can't reference any documents. That is not the case, correct? You can absolutely, reference, like you were talking about, Steve, having that detailed information, right? If I have a procedure or a policy that's outside of my SSP that gives more detail, it's not an issue for me to link that inside of that control statement, right?
That's correct. And I will tell you that we're going to want to see that document. So when you're
Of course.
uploading your SSP to us, if your SSP refers to any document, upload that document with it, because we're going to look at that too. But you're correct. That's, the preferred way to do it is to, like I said, short, easy statements of how you're meeting each control objective in the SSP, and then point to those details in your other documents.
Yes.
I would just,
Oh, please.
well, I would just add to that. Absolutely. I would also say it's a potential risk point when you do point. It's ideal, but it's also a risk point when you point to other documents to make sure that those references are still accurate and complete. So you can update the system security plan, but don't forget about the other documentation that you've got as well.
That is a very good point, because consistency. We cannot
Right.
say it enough. Because exactly to your point, if any of you guys come, you're going and doing an assessment, if your network diagram looks like one thing, your SSP says another thing, your procedural documents say something else, and none of them are agreeing, there's going to be confusion with your assessment team, and you're probably not going to meet those controls because you don't have that consistent story. I say it all the time, and I'll say it forever, but you need to tell a compelling story to your assessment team. That is the point of all of this. You want it to be complete, accurate, consistent, and compelling. It should be, okay, I look at the system security plan, I see your statement, it's very clear and concise. I see that you're referencing another document. I look at that, it's consistent with what I saw in the SSP. Any other subsequent documents are also consistent, and you move on. I mean, that's sort of the dream assessment, right? Where everything's consistent and you don't have to triple and quadruple check everything, I would assume. So to that point, this is a question that we also get all the time, but I know I'll talk a little bit about it, but I also want to get your opinion on it as well. So there's such an importance with partners. I know that there have been quite a few people who've, asked this question, like, okay, how much additional assistance am I going to need? Pretty much everybody understands that they're going to most likely need a third-party assessment from a C3PAO like, Sentar or Forvis at some point. But what about those other partners? I know that on the PreVeil side, we have an entire partner network of like those managed service providers we were talking about. We have different, consulting, CMMC consultants you can work with, and also C3PAOs we partner with. I was just wondering, and this is kind of to both of you, do you see any differences in those customers that you've done these assessments for who maybe have asked for a little bit of extra help from either a PreVeil or from an external consultant or something like that? Have you seen any differences in them being a little bit more successful because of that assistance, or maybe not?
I'll jump in with a short answer. Yes. The clients that we have had, the assessments we've performed, it is a difference of night and day for the ones that have used a company to help them prepare to make sure that they're meeting everything. A company that knows what they're doing, coming in
That's
and
an important one right there. Yeah.
yes. And the companies that go through that, the assessment goes way more smoothly. It's also good, you know, if you work with a company that when they're prepping you, that they also offer to sit in the assessment with you, because you know they can answer questions on your behalf. While you know it's ultimately the client's responsibility, they're meeting the control. The company that's helped you prepare will have, you know, most likely know the answer to the question. They'll understand the questions maybe better from that the assessors are asking, and they'll be able to answer those on your behalf. So yes, we've seen a huge difference in those that have worked with companies to help them prepare.
Yeah, not surprised by that at all. Not surprised at all. So thank you. That was wonderful. So I know that we do have a lot of questions to get to, so I'll try to start wrapping us up a little bit here. So really the goal of this has been to clarify that, compliance with CMMC is no longer this question mark, right? We're not, I know that for a lot of people, I mean, my goodness, including myself, who have been part of the CMMC eco space since the beginning or close to it, you've seen a lot of changes over the course of that, like 5 years. We've had proposed rules and not proposed rules, and 1.0 CMMC and 2.0 CMMC and 2.3, 2.13, and so many different things. We've had caps and versions of caps and final rules. And I mean, it's just so many different things have happened. If you could just give sort of an overarching statement to any of those people out there who are still like, you know what, this still isn't real. I've heard this game a million times. This isn't happening. I'm going to stick my fingers in my ears and I'm just going to go la 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 la, and this is all going to go away. What would you say to those people now, especially, when we're, July 30th, 2025, where we're at right now? What would you say to those people who are still waiting and thinking this won't happen?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, you hit it at the top. I mean, the rules are the final one is on the precipice of being approved and put into the Federal Register. So we have the timeline already outlined. That's pretty clear. I think what I would almost say to the people that you're referring to there is sort of a warning and caution that it is going to continue to evolve even after we get this rule in place.
It's a very good point.
There's NIST 800-171 revision 3 that's coming behind it. There are the CyberAB is sort of working on a common body of knowledge for how C3PAOs need to have consistent approaches to assessments. Right now, we're working together to make sure that happens, but we're going to get that documented, and there will be, the assessment processes could potentially change over time. Obviously, there's the annual ongoing review. So this is not hey, we're going to get there and we're done. There's no target out there where we're done. This is going to evolve, and there will be continuous, what we might call business as usual operations and controls that organizations are going to have to think about. So I wouldn't even think about it as it's coming and it's going to be here and we're there. We need to think down the road because it is going to continue to evolve and continue to be part of business.
That's a very good point. Did you want to add anything to that, Steve?
Yeah, I hear a lot similar thing of, they keep moving the target. I'm shooting for a target, it keeps moving. There has been a lot of changes. There were a lot of things established in the 32 rule. There'll be more in the 48 rule, but the base requirements at level 2, the 110 requirements, with the exception of the CMMC version 1 that added 20.
Right.
But they reverted back to that NIST 171. That's been a requirement since 2016. Nothing has changed in the requirements from that standpoint. All that's being added here is a way to assess it and a requirement that you be assessed by a third party. The MSPs, things like that, FedRAMP moderate equivalency, that stuff has been clarified over time. And yeah, that stuff has been a little bit of a moving target, but the very baseline of stuff that you need to do has not changed since 2016. Now, as Tom said, revision 3 is around the corner. NIST revised, 853s in revision 5 now. Revisions happen. You have plenty of time to review them before they go into effect. So that's not as big of a moving target. But yeah, 171 has not changed drastically since 2016.
Yeah, that's it. That is an extremely good point. And what Steve is referencing is the DFAR 7012 clause. So if you have a DFAR 7012 clause in your contract, you're already expected to be meeting the 110 NIST 800 171 controls. So that's an excellent point to make, just to remind everybody that even if, let's just say that CMMC disappeared tomorrow, you still, if you have a 7012 clause, are still responsible for doing this anyway. So regardless, you still need to get this done. So let's go ahead and do just sort of a recap of this. Has been a fantastic conversation. It's been really great understanding a little bit of those changes and those nuances that have maybe been a little bit more solidified. I'm sure it's answered a lot of questions for everybody out there. I mean, it's even answered questions for me. So I really appreciate that. So just as a quick recap, and I'll sort of frame it as a question. So I already know the answer to this one, but the assessment, I know that there are a lot of customers that we have and people out there who are listening right now who are terrified of their assessment. I mean, they are legitimately scared of getting assessed because they feel like it's very much like a gotcha exercise, like that you guys at Forvis and Sentar are just trying to come get them. You want to catch them doing something wrong. Is that the case?
No, we want you to pass. This is like we don't want to slow down the DoD being able to do their business. We don't want to put any contractors at risk. We're going to ethically perform an assessment. We are going to validate that you are meeting the requirements, but we're not going to be doing tricks to try to get you. It's not about trying to fail you. It's about you passing, you protecting the CUI information, you being able to continue to be of value to the DoD's contractor base.
Definitely. And Tom, did you want to add anything to that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the objective is success, I think, for everybody. I mean, there's nobody that likes to see failure. I don't think C3POs are trying to prove how smart they are or how, different they are from any others. We follow a pretty consistent approach. Yeah, I would completely agree with Steve.
Yeah. And then just, since I'm already talking to you anyway, Tom, what about, and I know you talked a little bit about documentation as well, and just to restate, how important is it that your documentation consistently defines what you're actually doing?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of append to what we talked about earlier, that it is the crux document. We haven't really talked about the assessment process and the artifact retention process that goes into that, but C3POs don't ultimately keep your system security plan, but you have to keep, as the contractor, the system security plan, and hash it and make sort of an irreversible copy, if you will, that's
Sort of
secure.
frozen in time, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, frozen in time, so that can be validated later. So it's very important that if something ever came up, any sort of False Claims Act case, heaven forbid, or, some sort of dispute, you've got that evidence ready to show, hey, here's what we did.
And perfect. And just to really wrap this up before we get to the Q&A, mock assessments. For those of you out there who do not understand what a mock assessment is, it's not necessarily a new term, but it's gaining more traction, I've noticed in the past few months. Steve, could you explain what a mock assessment is? And then Tom, I'm going to ask you why it's so important to consider getting one.
Sure. So a mock assessment is an assessment that a lot of C3PAOs are offering this. Sentar offers it as well. It allows us to come in and perform an assessment and give you, we can't give you advice on how to fix anything you missed, but we can tell you what you've missed. We write up a report and say why you missed it. We don't provide any consulting advice or any advisor advice, because if we did, there'd be a conflict of interest in us performing your formal assessment. But the mock assessment, it gives you a good idea of what you're missing and gives you a chance to fix all those things before you go through your formal assessment.
Excellent. And why would that be so important, Tom?
Yeah, essentially a simulated assessment, if you will. It's pretty much going through the process. There are a number of reasons why it's valuable. Obviously, it calls out the big rocks. I mean, if there's some big problem that you're going to have during the assessment that might not be POAMable or might, You might find a couple of things that need POAMs that are going to take a while to remediate, and getting that done in advance of the actual assessment is of value. But then also you kind of go through the process and there's some efficiencies gained with, hey, we've done this before. We know where to find the evidence. We know who the right contacts are on our side to provide and work with the C3PAO. We've already got our MSP involved. That went smoothly. You kind of find things that may not be part of the 110, but can kind of hamper an assessment and potentially delay it. And I know that C3PAOs really don't like delays. They can't, by the rule and the cap, we can't extend assessments beyond a certain period of time in certain phases. So if you go through that mock assessment, you've got comfort that, hey, we're ready for it, both from a control standpoint and from a actual process standpoint.
That's actually a great point. Yeah, for those of you who are scared about that assessment, this is a sort of a low risk way of getting familiar with the assessment and getting that feedback. That's perfect. Thank you guys. And I know that we do have so many questions, so I do want to leave some time for questions. And Orly, if you wanted to get started with those questions and start reading them out, we will start answering them.
This is a question where it says, why should I not wait to get ready and get assessed for CMMC? It's taking forever for them to finalize the rule.
I think that timeline slide kind of outlined it. And then we talked a number of times here, the webinar, a number of points on why it's really important. I think the one thing we haven't really talked about is the C3PO bottleneck, which is very real. So there are now 77 C3PO, I think it was 77 last night announced on the town hall, but that are pretty booked out for assessments through the rest of the year and into next year. I know there are some that are booked out through the Q2 of next year. So, I mean, getting in touch with C3PAOs right now and getting on their plan schedule, I think is really important.
That is a really good point. And that there is also, we didn't touch on this very much. We did touch on the final rule. There's a phased rollout approach that's in there that is all dependent on CFR 48 coming out. And then there's going to be, the first year is self-assessment, but after that, you're expected to have an assessment done. And to your point, Tom, if let's say it goes effective October 1, I have until September 30th to get an assessment. And if I'm already booked out into quarter 2 with most C3PAOs, that's going to be cutting it close. So that's a really good point.
And
it's I'll add to that. There's an estimated number, keeps changing, but around 70,000 defense contractors are expected to need a C3PO's assessment. There's 77 assessors currently, and then it expires after 3 years. So that 70,000 is going to be coming around for their renewal at the third year. So getting on a schedule is going to be difficult, and that is something that Cyber AB and DoD is working on to increase the number of C3PAOs, but right now it is a bottleneck.
What are the most cost-effective ways to demonstrate compliance with non-technical CMMC requirements, such as policies, training, and documentation, if you don't have an internal IT or security?
Okay, so if you're referring to documentation, policies, SSP, etc., there are several objectives that say things must be defined or identified. Make sure those are in there, that you have defined them and identified them. If you're trying to figure out how to write these things from scratch, there are a lot of companies that sell templates. AI does some, I check it, but it does a good job of spitting out some documentation that gives you a starting point that you can edit, tailor it to your environment. As far as some of the controls, like your annual things, your logging, log everything. If you have to do an annual self-assessment, have that generate an assessment report. Show that you did that by having some sort of tangible evidence that you've done that at the defined frequency.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just as a plug to PreVeil, if you are looking for one of those companies who does have sort of a jumping off point for you, PreVeil, we offer our compliance accelerator, which is exactly what it sounds like. We're trying to accelerate your path to getting to, being able to get a 110 out of 110. And one of the things that we did is create a full assessment documentation package for just a fake DIB company that we invented. And so all that documentation has already been validated by C3PAOs, has been written by me, a certified assessor myself. And so it's written in such a way to help you, because exactly to your point, the person who asked this question, if you don't have a huge IT team, or maybe you just don't have a huge team at all, maybe you don't have anybody who can really dedicate time to getting this stuff done, the options that Steve was talking about are wonderful, and also PreVeil is an option as well.
Well, just very quickly, not everything has to be a Cadillac, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. There are a lot
Very
of
true.
providers that are designed to help small businesses. So just back to the cost-effective idea, keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a lot of over engineering that can be done. You don't have to do that with a lot of these. Yeah.
How do you pick the right C3PAO assessor?
It's a
You
good
hire Sentar.
Or
Seriously,
Forvis.
seriously,
Yeah.
meet with several. So you can go to the Cyber AB website. There's a marketplace there that lists all the C3PAOs. Some of them will say they only work in some areas, some cities, some countries, etc. Review that and then reach out to several of them and have those initial calls. And they're going to want to talk to you. They're going to educate you in their process, how they do things, and it's really easy on just a couple of calls with a C3PAO's team, that you can find the one that you feel meets your requirements and your ability or your
Steve, just a real quick to add to that, should you also run your scope by the C3PAO and see if they agree with it before deciding?
So that's a thought. They're going to be doing that in the phase one of the assessment anyway. They're not going to be able to provide you any guidance on what needs to be changed. I don't know that we would do that, until we're under contract, but it's something, might be able to provide some.
Just a validation of, like, yes, we're good with this path. We'll assess it, not necessarily telling you anything that's wrong or right. But I know that there's been some confusion, I know, over the past year with some people with their scoping, and maybe, when you come to the assessment, the C3PA wasn't so sure about the scoping or what have you. So that's, yeah, good to have.
I think it's fair to kind of work through scoping. I mean, to Steve's point, we can't provide recommendations or
Right,
say
of
that
course.
something is in place or not in place, met, not met. But we can say, we could get a sense during an initial scoping call, walk through a network diagram. No, this is not going to be an environment that would undergo assessment. That probably would be about where I'd leave it. But,
Right.
we talked a little bit about this before we got on the webinar, that, now is the time to be thinking about this sort of a thing, because, there is going to be that bottleneck. A lot of these early assessments have been very successful, but, there are going to be contractors out there that have not been putting the thought into it, are going to scramble, try and get things ready. And then C3POs are going to be a little concerned about working with contractors like that. So just something else to think about.
I would also, in your discussions with them, tell them what technologies you have and ask them what their experience is assessing that.
Yeah, it's good.
We're a partner with PreVeil, and just like Tom's company is, and when they onboarded us as a partner, they trained us on their system so that we would understand it. We're not in collusion with them, and we're not, just saying they passed because we're a partner, but we do understand it. We know how to assess it. We know how to make sure it's applied correctly to their clients. And it's going to make the assessment go easier than maybe one that's never seen PreVeil.
Very true. Yeah. And that's why we have our partner network, and you guys are both part of that. So yeah, if you are a PreVeil customer thinking about PreVeil, we have a network of partners that, like Steve just said, get trained on PreVeil. So it just makes it a little bit easier and smoother for everybody involved. Yeah, that was a great question. Thanks.
Does the C3PO assess the FC assets during the CMMC level 2 assessment, or only focus on CUI assets?
So I'll define them real quick. FCI is federal contract information, and that's covered under what we all call CMMC level 1. It's also in a FAR regulation, a federal regulation, not a DoD one. And then CUI is controlled unclassified information, and that's more specific to CMMC and to the DoD. So Tom, I'll let you take that. What are you going to be looking at FCI when you're doing a level 2 CUI CMMC assessment?
We don't look at FCI necessarily. Level 2, the question I think was about a level 2 assessment, which is that controlled unclassified information. Now, a number of the controls that apply at that level 1 for FCI are much easier, so to speak, to implement, kind of fall into that level 2 as well. So we look at the controls per se, but we're not looking for FCI. So let's just say if an organization reached out to us, we don't have controlled unclassified information. We have FCI and we want a level 2 assessment. We're not going to go conduct a level 2 assessment around FCI, but we would conduct it around CUI assets, CUI information, or the CUI environment.
So making it very clear, because this wasn't always the delineation. I know previously in CMMC, it was sort of like a build from 1 to 2, and now it sort of seems like they've been separated out. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. Yeah. A little more clearly.
Yeah. So FCI at that level 1 is just for FCI, like what Tom was saying, just to make this really, really clear for everybody, because that's another thing that's been sort of solidified in the past 12 months. FCI is its own thing. That's a self-attestation. And then you have CMMC level 2, which is a self-attestation, but also with a C3 PAO most likely at some point. And Tom, did you have something?
And I was just going to say, just a point to make sure it's clear, there are no level 1 certification assessments that are sort of official certification.
Right.
Want to make sure that's clear.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that is very true. That was something they hit on last night in the town hall too, if you guys were on it. If there is anybody out there who is talking to someone and they are trying to tell you they are level CMMC level 1 certified, they are not. That is not a thing. There is no certification. It's all self-assessment and self-attestation. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I think we could probably answer one more question, Orly, before we
All right. Is there any flexibility in control interpretation with the assessors?
That's a good question. I know that, Tom, you kind of hit on that a little bit, and I think, Steve, you did too. So that flexibility and control implementation, it sounds like C3 PAOs have flexibility, but they're also trying to kind of get uniformity. Is that right?
It kind of depends upon, I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. There are different ways to assess controls too. So there's observe, and examine and test. In control interpretation, I mean, there is assessor's judgment effectively in any framework that we work with. We are working on a common body of knowledge and approach to making sure we're consistent about that. And right now we sort of have a roundtable group that addresses questions like these, but the word flexibility always makes sort of the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So I just
You
want
want
to
people to get away with anything. No,
Yeah,
indeed.
right.
And,
Right. And I'm sure that's
yeah.
not the impetus for the
No.
question, but I want to
You wanna be
caveat that.
careful. No, that makes sense. And then I think too, the other thing we hit a little bit on this, and I just want to kind of add it with this, is what about corrections? Like that's a thing that people ask. And I know that was hit on at the town hall yesterday as well. And this is just, I know we only have 2 minutes, so just a brief thought on this. If I have, like Steve, if I'm in the middle of an assessment with Sentar and I have something in my SSP I need to update, you see the implementation is being done correctly, but maybe my SSP isn't 100% up to date. Is that something that I would be able to perhaps tweak in the assessment, or maybe not?
So we'll let you make some minor documentation changes such as that. I had one client that they had not signed their SSP, making it formalized. It was their formal when they went by. We had enough evidence that was their final version, but there wasn't a signature on it. We allow to do things like that, and to an extent, maybe some other documentation changes. Now, what we would expect to see is if you have a policy or a change management plan on how you update those that documentation, we'd want to see evidence that you performed it when you made that change. And another thing that Matt Travis of Cyber AB has brought up multiple times, and it can't be stressed enough, there is a 10-day period after from the time the interviews stop to that an OSC has to provide additional information. This is not intended for you to fix things and then provide that information. It is intended for if someone was out sick and that needed to answer a question, or your MSP for whatever reason was not available during the interview week. You have 10 days after that scheduled interview that you may provide additional already existing evidence that you are meeting a control that's already implemented.
I think that's the key right there. Already implemented. That's the key.
Yes.
This has been so wonderful. I can't thank you guys enough for joining us, Orly. And so if you need to get a hold of anybody at PreVeil, there's our information right there, or Sentar, Forvis, Mazars. Just please reach out. We're happy to help you however we can. And we know everybody's going to get to 110.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Stephen. Really appreciate all your input, and to our audience, thank you for attending.